He stood in the courtroom, his fingers trembling, a thin file clutched in his hand. The fluorescent lights hummed, cold and unforgiving, reflecting off the polished wood of the judge's bench. He didn't look at the judge. He looked at his son, Jareth, sitting at the table opposite him. Jareth's suit was immaculate, a deep navy silk that caught the light. His face was a mask of cold, dispassionate stone. He looked nothing like the little boy who used to cling to his leg on the factory floor, his small face streaked with dirt and awe. The lawyer beside Jareth spoke, her voice clipped and precise, detailing the terms of the acquisition, the legal arguments, the cold, final reasons for this ending. She was good. Too good. Lyle closed his eyes for a brief moment, the silence behind his lids filled with the ghost of a memory. A younger Jareth, his hand in his father's, walking through a field of tall, whispering grass behind their old home. The rustling of that long-ago field was louder than the lawyer's voice. He opened his eyes. Jareth still wasn't looking at him. Lyle felt the truth of it, a physical pain in his chest. His son had gotten what he wanted. He had everything he'd ever wanted, and now he was taking the last thing left. Jareth didn't even know the real reason why. Not yet. Before I begin this story, can you tell me where in the world you're listening to from? The old pickup truck, a rust-colored Ford with a faded paint job and a persistent squeak in the front axle, pulled into the driveway. It wasn't my son's truck. The thing was a gleaming, midnight blue sedan, so low to the ground it looked like it was gliding on asphalt. The kind of car you see in glossy magazines, its tires clean enough to eat off of, its windows tinted so dark you couldn't see the man inside. For a moment my heart stopped. I was standing on the porch, a coffee cup warming my hands, a familiar comfortable chill in the air. I thought it was a mistake, someone coming to the wrong house. My son Jareth worked hard, I knew that. He was a good boy. He'd just finished his shift at the warehouse down by the old railway. He'd drive his own beat-up sedan, the one with the broken passenger window that he'd taped over with clear plastic a few months ago. That's what I expected to see. Not this thing. The driver's side door opened, a silent, smooth motion, and Jareth stepped out. He looked different. His clothes were different. He wore a crisp button-down shirt that looked tailored, and his jeans were a perfect dark wash. There was no grease on his hands, no tired slump to his shoulders. There was a smile on his face I hadn't seen in years. It was a smile of pure, unbridled joy. He saw me, and the smile widened, showing a flash of the boy I remembered. He walked toward me, his steps light and full of a new confidence. I put down my coffee cup, my hands still tingling with the memory of its warmth. "Jareth," I said, my voice thick with a question I couldn't form. "What is this? Did you get a promotion?" He just shook his head, the smile never leaving his face. He pulled a key fob from his pocket, a heavy, solid thing, and tossed it to me. I caught it reflexively, the weight of it feeling foreign in my palm. The car's lights flashed in response. "It's a gift, Dad," he said, his voice full of a giddy excitement. "For you, the factory, the house, the truck. You've always given me everything. Now it's my turn." My heart swelled with a feeling I couldn't describe. It was pride, of course. Immense, overpowering pride. But it was also something else. A flicker of anxiety, a tiny doubt. Where did a boy who worked in a warehouse get the money for a car like this? The question felt wrong to even think, so I pushed it away. He was my son. He was happy. That was what mattered. I looked at the car, then back at him, a sudden wave of emotion making my voice tremble. I wanted to tell him my news, the news I'd been holding on to for months, the news that would change both our lives forever, the news that would make his gesture of giving me a car seem like a drop in the ocean. I opened my mouth to speak, to tell him about the offer, the one that would sell the factory and change everything. But he cut me off. "You're not going to believe it," he said, his eyes shining. "This is just the beginning. I need to tell you what happened. The craziest thing." He looked over my shoulder, as if expecting someone. His wife, Cassidy, stepped out of the house. She had a strange look on her face, a mixture of a shy smile and something like concern. Her eyes met mine for a brief moment, and then she looked away. Jareth hadn't noticed. He was still grinning, looking at his new car. I decided to wait. The news could keep. I would tell him later. We would celebrate later. We would sit down and talk about everything. He'd understand. He had to. He'd see that my dreams for him were bigger than any car. I just had to tell him. It was a secret I had held for so long, a heavy weight on my shoulders. I was ready to share it with him. He was ready to hear it. He took a step toward me, reaching out to put a hand on my shoulder. "Dad," he said, his voice dropping to a low conspiratorial whisper, "I have to tell you something. Cassidy and I are going to take a trip. A long one. We're going to get away from here for a while, celebrate. We're just so happy. You have no idea." The look on his face told me he wasn't talking about a promotion anymore. This wasn't about a raise. It wasn't about a simple gift. It was something else. Something monumental. I felt a knot form in my stomach, the tiny flicker of anxiety from before growing a little bigger. What was he going to say? What was he so happy about? What was so big that it was taking him away from here? The town, the life he'd always known. He was a creature of habit. He'd never been on a long trip. My mind raced. I couldn't imagine what had changed so much. I just stared at him, my mind blank, trying to process it all. The expensive car, the clothes, the giddy look on his face, the way Cassidy had just avoided my eyes. It all felt like a movie, a scene I was watching from the outside. I couldn't wrap my head around it. He was about to tell me something that would change everything, something that would flip our world on its axis, and I just couldn't prepare for it. The air around us felt charged, thick with an unspoken truth, the truth that was about to hit me like a train. "We won the lottery, Dad," he said, the words a simple, joyful declaration. $81 million. We won. Lyle walked through the foyer, his footsteps echoing on the polished marble floor. It was a cavernous, impersonal space, all sharp lines and muted colors. There was a grand staircase, a sweeping curve of dark wood and wrought iron that looked like it belonged in a film. He felt small, out of place. This wasn't a home. It was a monument to money. He had been invited to Jareth and Cassidy's housewarming party, a sprawling affair with a catered buffet and a dozen people he didn't know. Everyone seemed to move with a strange kind of grace, their laughter light and empty, their conversations a series of polite, distant exchanges. Jareth was different here. He was still my son, but he had a new skin. He was hosting, a forced smile on his face, his eyes constantly scanning the room, as if looking for someone important. He was no longer the boy who got dirt on his hands. He was a rich man. He was a new kind of man. Lyle wandered into the living room, a vast space with floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking a manicured lawn and a swimming pool that shimmered under the afternoon sun. He saw a few of Jareth's friends from the old days, from the warehouse, standing awkwardly in a corner, holding plastic cups and looking at the expensive art on the walls. They looked as out of place as he felt. He saw one of them try to talk to Jareth, to get his attention, to shake his hand, but Jareth was already turning away, his attention on a man in a crisp suit who was talking about stocks and investments. Jareth's face was a mixture of fascination and something like reverence. The old Jareth, the one who worked for a living, would have pulled his friend aside, offered him a beer, talked about the game last night. This Jareth was different. This Jareth was distant. He found a quiet corner by the window, a plush armchair that felt too soft, too perfect. He watched his son move through the room, a stranger in a familiar face. He watched Cassidy too, talking with a group of women, her smile a little too tight, her eyes darting to Jareth every few seconds, a flicker of something he couldn't place in their depths. He tried to remember the last time he'd had a real conversation with his son, a conversation about anything other than the new house, the new car, the new life. It had been weeks. He tried to tell himself it was just a phase, that Jareth was just overwhelmed, that he was still the same boy underneath all this newness, that he'd come back to his roots eventually, that he'd remember who he was, where he came from. He wanted to believe it so badly. He wanted to sit down with him, just the two of them, and talk about his secret, about the factory, about the future. But Jareth was always busy. He was always on a call, or talking to a new person, or looking at something on his phone. He never sat still. He was a wound-up spring, a coil of nervous energy, his constant motion a stark contrast to the quietness of the massive house. Lyle finally caught his eye, and Jareth gave him a brief, distracted smile. He gestured to a waiter with a tray of champagne flutes, then turned his back to Lyle to talk to a different group of people. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a punch to the gut. It felt like a dismissal. It felt like a goodbye. He wanted to tell him. He wanted to pull him aside and say, "Son, the factory is sold. The money is coming. A lot of money. More than you think. You don't have to do this. You don't have to be this person." But he couldn't. The moment was gone. Lyle felt a sudden, crushing loneliness. He was standing in a room full of people, but he was completely alone. He was watching his son, but he couldn't reach him. He felt the chasm between them widen, a silent, gaping distance. The house, for all its size and opulence, felt empty. It was a hollow shell, a gilded cage. He thought of his own small, comfortable home, with its worn-out furniture and its familiar scent of old books and coffee. A home that was filled with memories of a life he had built with his late wife, Odessa. A life that felt a million miles away from this cold, silent mansion. He felt a deep, profound sadness settle over him. He knew, in that moment, that things had changed, that they would never be the same again. It was more than the money. It was something in Jareth's eyes, something cold, something distant. A look he had never seen before, and he knew it was a look that wasn't going to go away. Lyle finally found Jareth alone for a moment, standing by the vast open windows. "Son," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. Jareth turned, his face a little more tired now, the forced smile gone. "Hey, Dad," he said. "Having a good time?" Lyle shook his head. "I just want to talk to you for a minute," he said. "Just the two of us." Jareth sighed, a barely perceptible motion, and ran a hand through his hair. "Dad, I'm busy," he said, a sharp edge in his voice. "We can talk later. I'll call you. Just enjoy the party." The words were a dismissal, a finality. Lyle felt the hurt, a raw, aching pain. He looked at his son, this stranger in a suit, and the truth hit him. The distance wasn't just physical. It was emotional. They had left him behind. He was a part of the old life, a part of the past. Jareth was moving forward, and Lyle was not part of the plan. The sound of the doorbell was sharp, insistent. Lyle was on the porch, in his usual chair, watching the sun set, the sky a blaze of orange and purple. The day had been quiet, the house filled with a familiar, comfortable silence that he had come to cherish. The silence of his own company, the silence of a life lived. He had been thinking about Jareth, about the party, about the distance that had grown between them. He had tried to call him, but the call went to voicemail. He had left a message, a brief, awkward message about wanting to talk. There had been no reply. He had told himself not to worry, that his son was busy, that he was just adjusting to the new life, that he would call when he had a moment. But now, the sharp ring of the doorbell felt like a premonition. He stood, his old knees protesting with a soft pop, and walked to the door. A young woman in a gray business suit stood on the other side of the screen door, her face a neutral, professional mask. She held a large envelope in her hand. "Lyle?" she asked, her voice flat. "Are you Lyle?" He nodded, a feeling of unease settling over him. He had never seen her before. She wasn't a neighbor. She wasn't a friend. She was official. Her voice had the same cold, impersonal tone as Jareth's lawyer at the party. It sent a chill through him. "I have some papers to serve you," she said, her voice a monotone. She held out the envelope. Lyle pushed open the screen door, taking the envelope from her hand. It was thick and heavy, the paper crisp and new. He looked at the woman's face, searching for a hint of something, a hint of what was inside. But there was nothing there, just a blank, professional stare. She gave him a curt nod, a practiced, impersonal gesture, and turned to walk away. He watched her get into a car, a black sedan with tinted windows, and drive off. He closed the door, the envelope still in his hand, his heart pounding a slow, heavy beat in his chest. He felt like he was holding a bomb. He felt like the weight of it was suffocating him. He walked back to his chair on the porch. His legs feeling weak, he sat down, staring at the envelope, his fingers tracing the outline of the paper. There was a name on it. A law firm. He didn't recognize the name. His stomach clenched. He slowly, carefully, opened the envelope. He pulled out the papers, a thick stack of legal documents. His eyes scanned the first page, his mind trying to make sense of the dense official language. And then he saw it. The address. His address. The address of the home he had lived in for 40 years. The home he had built with his own 2 hands. The home where he had raised his son. The home where he had raised his son. The home where his wife had died. It was a legal notice. An eviction notice. He was being ordered to leave his home. His hands started to shake. The paper rattled softly in his grasp. He read the words again, trying to convince himself that he had read them wrong. But they were clear, unmistakable. The notice stated that the property had been sold and that he had 30 days to vacate. He flipped through the papers, his mind racing, trying to find a name, a signature, something that would make sense of this. And then he saw it, the signature on the bottom, the name of the new owner, Jareth. He had bought the house, My son had bought my house, and now he was evicting me. The world tilted, the colors of the sunset blurring into a mess of fire and purple. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He couldn't breathe. It was a betrayal so profound, so absolute that it felt like a physical blow. He felt the breath leave his lungs in a single desperate gasp. He felt his heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. He didn't know what to do. He felt numb, a shock that ran so deep it felt like a physical paralysis. He stared at the signature, the familiar slant of the letters, the bold, confident scrawl. It was his son's name. It was a name he loved, a name he was proud of. He had no words. He had no thoughts. Just a single cold, black hole in his chest. He looked at his phone, his hand trembling so violently he could barely hold it. He found Jareth's name in his contacts, his thumb hovering over the call button. He had to know. He had to hear it from his son's mouth. He pressed the button. It rang once, twice. Then a click. A voice he barely recognized, a voice that was distant and cold, answered. "Hello, Dad," Jareth said, his voice flat. "I saw the notice. The money is yours. We'll talk later. You should have listened. You're no longer my problem." And the line went dead. The factory floor was quiet. A deep, heavy silence. The machines were cold, their massive metal bodies dormant and still. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight that cut through a grimy window high on the wall. The scent of old oil, metal shavings, and honest work hung in the air. This was Lyle's sanctuary. It was his life. It was a place where he could think, where he could be. The eviction notice was folded neatly in his jacket pocket, a cruel joke that felt like a burning weight. He had been wandering the floor for an hour, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders hunched, his head down. He ran a hand over the cold steel of a lathe, the familiar sensation a small comfort. He remembered the day he bought that machine, a massive, ancient beast that had been a bargain at an auction. He and Boone had spent a week fixing it, their hands and faces smeared with grease and sweat, their laughter echoing in the empty building. A door creaked open at the far end of the factory. It was Boone. He was a man with a shock of white hair and a face lined with 1,000 smiles, 1,000 worries. He had been Lyle's right hand for 30 years. He was more than an employee. He was a brother. Boone walked toward him, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He stopped a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, his face concerned. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just looked at Lyle, and in his eyes Lyle saw his own reflection, a man who was broken, a man who was lost. "Lyle," Boone said, his voice quiet, kind. "What are you doing here? You should be home." Lyle shook his head. "I have nowhere to be," he said, the words a hollow ache in his chest. Boone's brow furrowed. "I don't understand." Lyle reached into his pocket and pulled out the notice, handing it to Boone. Boone's eyes widened as he read the words, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. He looked up at Lyle, his eyes filled with a raw, impotent anger. "Jareth," he said, his voice a low growl. "He did this?" Lyle just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Boone folded the paper and handed it back. "I don't get it, Lyle," he said, his voice softer now. "After everything you did for that boy, everything you planned." Lyle felt a wave of shame wash over him. Shame that he had to go through this. Shame that his son was capable of such a thing. Shame that he had kept his secret for so long. The secret about the factory. The secret that would have given Jareth everything he could ever want. He had planned to sell the factory for months. He had been working with a corporate buyer, a group of quiet, serious men who saw a lot of potential in the old building and its skilled employees. The offer had been massive, life-changing. He had been planning to surprise Jareth with the news. He wanted to give his son a gift that was truly a legacy, something that would set him up for life. He had wanted to give him the world. The money from the sale would have been more than Jareth's lottery winnings. It would have been a new life, a clean start, a future built on a foundation of hard work and love. He felt the old familiar ache of grief for his wife, Odessa, a woman who had stood beside him through everything. She would have known what to do. She would have known how to fix this. But she was gone, and he was alone. Lyle walked to his office, a small dusty room at the back of the factory. He sat down at his old wooden desk, the surface scarred with years of use. He pulled out a drawer, his fingers fumbling for a moment, and pulled out a manila folder. The folder was thick, its contents a secret he had guarded for so long. Inside were the contracts, the agreements, the letters from the buyers, the future he had planned for his son. It was all here, in this folder. He had been so close to giving his son everything. He felt a sudden, searing pain. It was too late. All of it. Too late. The past, the present, the future. all twisted into a knot of regret and loss. He heard Boone walk in behind him. "Lyle," Boone said, his voice full of a gentle, paternal concern. "The phone. It's ringing." Lyle just stared at the folder, his eyes burning with unshed tears. The phone rang again, a shrill, insistent noise in the quiet room. He looked at Boone, his face a mask of exhaustion. "Let it ring," he said, his voice flat. Boone just shook his head. "Lyle, it's the lawyer. From the company. The one you were talking to. He says it's urgent. He wants a meeting. Tomorrow morning. He says they have a new offer." The new offer was a lie. Lyle knew it the moment the words left Boone's mouth, a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach. The lawyer, Mr. Neem, was a man of his word, a man who had been respectful and professional throughout the entire negotiation process. He would not have called on a Sunday evening unless there was a reason, and it was not a new offer. The call was a lie. The whole thing was a lie. Lyle looked at Boone, who was staring at him, his face a mask of confusion. "Boone," Lyle said, his voice low and tight. "Who was on the phone?" Boone's brow furrowed. "It was Mr. Harding," he said, his voice uncertain. "It sounded like him. He said the offer had changed and he needed you to sign new papers in the morning." Lyle shook his head, a single definitive motion. He had a bad feeling. He had a very bad feeling. He walked to the window, the single pane of glass a mirror of his own worried face. The sun had set, and the darkness outside was a thick, oppressive blanket. He felt a profound sense of isolation. His home, his life, his son, everything was falling apart, and he didn't know how to stop it. He sat back at his desk, his hands clasped together, his knuckles white. He had to think. He had to be calm. He had to find out what was really going on. He pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking, and looked up the name of the law firm that had been on the eviction notice. He found it. He found the name of the lawyer who had served him the papers. And then he saw it. A news article, a small, insignificant story in the local paper. It was about a company, a shell company, a company with a strange, unfamiliar name. The article was short, a brief blurb about a new business moving into town, a new business that had recently purchased the land where the factory stood. The land, not the building. The land. Lyle's heart pounded in his chest. A cold, hard realization dawned on him. Jareth didn't buy the house just to hurt him. He was trying to hurt him. He was trying to take everything. The factory was on the last plot of land that was still in my name. The rest of the land had been sold over the years to a series of developers. He had kept this plot, the one with the factory on it. It was his. It was his legacy. It was a place he could always come back to. It was a place he could always call his own. But Jareth had found a way around it. He had created a shell company, a company that was now trying to take his land. He was trying to take his factory. The one thing that was still his. The one thing that he had planned to sell for Jareth's benefit. The ultimate act of betrayal. He felt a sudden, visceral rage, a fire in his veins that he hadn't felt in years. He wanted to scream. He wanted to rage. He wanted to go to Jareth's house and demand an explanation. He wanted to know why his son, a boy he had loved and raised, a boy he had given everything to, would do this to him. He wanted to know why. The question was a burning fire in his mind. He stood up, his legs trembling, and walked to the door. He had to see a lawyer. He had to find out what was going on. He had to find a way to fight back. He had to fight for his home. He had to fight for his factory. He had to fight for his life. But most of all, he had to fight for the legacy he had planned to give his son. He had to find a way to save him from himself. He had to find a way to save him from this life he had chosen. The one thing he couldn't do was give up. He looked at the phone, and he called the lawyer who had been working with him on the factory sale. He had to tell him what was going on. He had to tell him about Jareth. He had to tell him about the shell company. He had to tell him everything, and then he had to prepare to fight. He couldn't let Jareth win. Not like this. Lyle hung up the phone, his hand trembling. The lawyer had been silent on the other end, listening to Lyle's frantic, broken explanation. He had listened to everything, and then he had said a single, chilling word. "Lyle, I'm sorry. I can't help you." He had explained that his law firm had a policy of not getting involved in family disputes. It was a polite dismissal, a final word. Lyle was on his own. He was on his own in a fight against a boy he had raised. A boy who had everything. He felt a sudden, profound sense of being utterly alone in the world. He felt like a castaway on a deserted island, the tide of betrayal rising all around him. He walked out of his office, his head down, and started to walk toward the main door. But then he saw it. A piece of paper taped to the door. It was a legal notice. Another one. This one was a claim on the factory itself. Jareth was suing for control of the company, claiming Lyle was mentally unfit to run it. The pawnshop smelled of old wood, dust, and something a little metallic and sharp. It was a small place, tucked away on a side street in the old part of town, its windows crammed with a chaotic collection of forgotten treasures. Lyle pushed open the heavy glass door, a little bell tinkling softly above his head, and stepped inside. He felt a sudden, crushing weight of shame. He had never been in a place like this before. He had worked his whole life, built something from nothing, and now here he was, in a pawn shop, trying to get a few $100s to pay a lawyer. The notice he had received was a cold, cruel joke. Jareth's lawyer, a woman named Kala, had filed a motion to have him declared mentally incompetent to run the factory. The legal fees were going to be astronomical. He had no choice. He had to fight back. He had to prove he was still in control. He had to prove he was still himself. He had to prove he was still a father. He walked to the counter, his hands deep in his pockets, his shoulders hunched. He could feel the eyes of the man behind the counter on him, a quick, assessing glance. The man was old, with a graying beard and a kind, tired face. He looked at Lyle with a knowing, compassionate look. Lyle felt a sudden, hot flush of shame. He didn't want anyone to know. He didn't want anyone to see him like this. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, the box worn and faded with time, and placed it on the counter. He didn't open it. He just stared at the worn velvet, his heart a raw, bleeding wound in his chest. The box held his wife Odessa's wedding ring, the ring he had given her on their wedding day, a small, simple gold band that she had never taken off. The ring that had been a part of her, a part of their life, a part of their story. The ring that he had carried in his pocket since the day she had passed away, a constant reminder of the love they had shared. He couldn't look at it. He couldn't bear to see it. He couldn't bear to part with it. The man behind the counter, a quiet, gentle man, didn't say anything. He just reached out a hand, his fingers long and thin, and took the box. He opened it carefully, and the simple gold band glinted in the dim light. The man looked at the ring, then back at Lyle, his eyes filled with a deep, profound sadness. He knew the story behind the ring. He knew what it meant. Lyle's voice was a low, desperate whisper. "I need a few $100s, he said, his voice cracking. "For a lawyer. It's for my son." The man looked at him, his face a mixture of sympathy and understanding. He nodded. "I understand," he said, his voice a quiet rumble. "I'll give you what I can." He turned and walked to a scale, placing the ring on it. Lyle looked away, unable to watch. It was a betrayal of his wife's memory. It was a sacrifice that felt like a death. The man came back and placed a stack of bills on the counter. 500, he said, his voice quiet. "It's all I can give you right now. I'm sorry." Lyle nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He took the money, his fingers trembling, and put it in his pocket. He looked at the man, a silent thank you in his eyes. The man just nodded back. "My name is Neoma," he said. "I used to work for you. About 10 years ago, you gave me a loan once to help me get back on my feet. I remember." Lyle just stared at him, his mind blank. He had no memory of the man, but he remembered the kindness of the man who had worked for him, the kindness of the man who had remembered, the kindness of the man who had helped him when he was in trouble. He felt a sudden powerful wave of emotion, gratitude, humility, shame. It was all a messy tangle of feeling. Neoma's voice was a low, kind murmur. "Lyle," he said, "I don't know what's going on, but I heard some things. About Jareth. He's been reckless. He's been in some bad company." The words were a warning, a hint of something darker, something Lyle didn't want to know, something he had been trying to ignore. But now it was a siren call, a beacon of light in the darkness. He had to know. He had to find out what was going on. He had to save his son. He couldn't just stand by and watch him destroy himself. He couldn't let this money, this sudden windfall, ruin his son's life. He had to do something. He had to fight back. He had to find a way to get Jareth back. He had to find a way to save him from himself. Neoma looked at him, his eyes filled with a deep, profound concern. "Lyle," he said, his voice a low whisper. "He's in deep trouble." The bar was a dive, the kind of place with a sticky floor and the faint scent of stale beer and desperation. The jukebox in the corner was playing a country song about a broken heart, the music a sad, low thrum in the air. Lyle sat at the bar, a glass of water in front of him, watching the people come and go. He was a ghost in the room, a man out of time. He was there for a reason. He was there to talk to Trina, a former employee who had worked at the factory for a few years before quitting abruptly. Neoma, the pawn shop owner, had told Lyle to find her. He had said she might know something. He had said she might know about the company Jareth was keeping. He had said she might know about the trouble Jareth was in. He had to know. He had to find out what was going on. He had to save his son. Trina was a whirlwind of motion, her hands flying as she served drinks, her face a blur of motion. She was a small woman with a tired face and a tired heart. He saw her glance at him, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a flicker of surprise. She stopped in front of him, a beer bottle in her hand, and placed it on the counter with a quiet thud. "Lyle," she said, her voice a low murmur. "I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry." Lyle just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He didn't want her sympathy. He wanted her help. He wanted the truth. He looked at her and he saw the fear in her eyes. The fear of something she knew, something she was trying to keep hidden. He leaned forward, his voice a low, desperate whisper. "Trina," he said, "Neoma told me you might know something. About Jareth. About the people he's been hanging out with." Her face went pale. She looked around the bar, a quick, furtive glance, and then her eyes landed on his. She shook her head, a quick, frantic motion. "Lyle, I can't talk about that," she said, her voice a whisper. "It's too dangerous." He looked at her, his eyes pleading. "Please, Trina," he said. "He's my son. He's trying to destroy me. He's trying to take everything I have. I don't understand why. I have to know. I have to save him." Her eyes softened for a brief moment, a flicker of compassion in their depths. She looked at him, and she saw the pain in his eyes. She saw the desperation. She saw the love. She sighed, a long, weary sound, and she leaned closer, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "Lyle, he's in with the wrong crowd," she said. "He's been gambling. A lot. At a place downtown. A place they don't like to lose." The words were a chilling confirmation of his worst fears. He felt a cold dread settle in his bones. He knew what she was talking about. He knew about the places like that. The places where you don't just lose money, you lose a part of yourself. You lose your soul. He looked at her, his mind racing. He had to know more. He had to know the full story. He had to know who these people were. He had to find a way to get him out. He leaned forward, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "Trina," he said, "tell me everything. Tell me who they are. Tell me what's going on." She shook her head again, a single, firm motion. "I can't," she said. "I'm sorry. But I can tell you this. The man he owes money to, he's not someone you want to mess with. His name is Oswin, and he's not a gambler. He's a loan shark, and he's dangerous. He doesn't care about money. He cares about power. He'll take everything Jareth has. Everything, and then he'll come for you." The words were a hammer blow, a cold, hard fact, a terrible, horrifying truth. Lyle felt the breath leave his lungs. His son wasn't just being foolish. He wasn't just being greedy. He was being hunted. He was being used. He was a pawn in a game he didn't understand. He looked at Trina, and he saw the fear in her eyes. The fear of a woman who knew too much. The fear of a woman who had seen things she couldn't unsee. Trina looked at him, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. "Lyle, you have to be careful," she said, her voice a low whisper. "Oswin knows everything about Jareth. He knows about his family. He knows about the lottery. He knows about the factory. He knows everything." The words were a terrifying revelation. Jareth's lottery win wasn't a secret. The factory wasn't a secret. The new life wasn't a secret. It was all a part of a larger, more sinister plan. He looked at Trina, his mind racing. He had to find out more. He had to find a way to get Jareth out of this mess. He had to find a way to save him from himself. Trina slid a small, folded piece of paper across the counter. "It's a name," she said, her voice a whisper. "A name of a lawyer. A good one. She helped me with a problem once. She might be able to help you. Her name is Maribel. She's honest. And she's smart. And she's not afraid of Oswin. Not anymore." Lyle took the paper, his fingers trembling, and looked at the name. Maribel. He had to meet her. He had to tell her everything. He had to find a way to fight back. He had to save his son. The receptionist was an old woman with a kind face and a gentle smile. She led Lyle to a small office, a room with a single window overlooking a brick alleyway. The lawyer, Maribel, was a woman in her late 40s, with a no-nonsense face and a pair of kind, intelligent eyes. She motioned for him to sit down, and he sank into a plush leather chair, the leather worn and soft with age. He felt a moment of relief. This wasn't a fancy corporate law firm. This was a place where people came for help. This was a place where people came to be heard. He looked at Maribel, and he saw the kindness in her eyes. He saw the compassion. He saw the strength. He knew in that moment that he had made the right choice. He told her everything. He told her about the lottery win. He told her about the new house. He told her about the eviction notice. He told her about the shell company. He told her about the claim on the factory. He told her about the pawned ring. He told her about Trina. He told her about Oswin. He told her everything, a torrent of words pouring out of him, a dam that had finally broken. He held nothing back. He wanted her to know the full story. He wanted her to know the full extent of the betrayal. He wanted her to know the full extent of his love for his son. He wanted her to know everything. Maribel listened, her face a thoughtful mask, her eyes fixed on his. She didn't interrupt. She didn't say anything. She just listened, a quiet, reassuring presence in the room. When he was done, she was silent for a long moment, her hands clasped together on her desk. "Lyle," she said, her voice a low, steady rumble. "This is a mess." He just nodded, his heart a heavy stone in his chest. "I know," he said. "I know it is. I don't know what to do." She leaned forward, her elbows on the desk, and looked at him. "Lyle," she said, "Jareth is being reckless, and he's being manipulated. Oswin is a bad man. He's not a gambler. He's a loan shark. He's been known to persuade people to give him what he wants." The words were a chilling confirmation of what he already knew. "I know," he said. "I know he is, but I have to save him. I have to get him out of this." Maribel sighed, a long, weary sound. "Lyle, you can't," she said. "You can't save him from himself. You can only save yourself. You need to fight for your factory. You need to fight for your home. You need to fight for your life." He shook his head. "I can't," he said. "I can't fight him. He's my son. I can't sue my own son." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a deep, profound sadness. "Lyle," she said, "he's already suing you. He's already trying to have you declared incompetent. He's already trying to take everything you have." The words were a cold, hard truth, a terrible, horrifying reality. He felt a wave of nausea. He hadn't thought about that. He had been so focused on saving Jareth that he hadn't thought about the possibility of fighting him. He hadn't thought about the possibility of having to go to court against his own son. He felt a cold dread settle in his bones. He couldn't do it. He couldn't. He couldn't be in a courtroom, fighting against his own son. It felt wrong. It felt like a betrayal of everything he believed in. He had to find another way. He had to find a way to make Jareth see the truth. He had to find a way to get him to come back. He had to find a way to remind him of who he was. Lyle reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the old manila folder. The folder was thick, its contents a secret he had guarded for months. He placed it on the desk. He looked at Maribel. "This is the truth," he said, his voice a low whisper. "This is what I was going to do. This is what I was going to give him." He opened the folder and showed her the contracts, the letters from the buyers, the offer that would have made Jareth a multimillionaire, a man with a future. He watched her eyes widen as she read the documents, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a profound sense of sadness. "Lyle," she said, her voice a low murmur, "you were going to do this for him. After everything he did?" He just nodded. "He's my son," he said. "I love him. I have to save him." Maribel looked at him, a new understanding in her eyes. "Lyle," she said, "this changes everything. But there's something you need to know." He looked at her, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm in his chest. "What?" he asked, his voice a low, desperate whisper. "What do I need to know?" She leaned forward, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "His lawyer isn't just trying to get the factory," she said. "She's trying to get you declared incompetent so they can take everything. Everything you own." The photo album was old, its leather cover worn and faded with time. The pages were yellowed, the edges curled and brittle. It was a book of memories, a record of a life lived. Lyle sat on the floor of his old house, a quiet house that now felt like a prison. He was surrounded by boxes, a dozen of them, all filled with a lifetime of memories. He had been packing, a small, desperate act of defiance against the cruel truth of the eviction notice. He had no choice. He had to leave, but he didn't have to leave without a fight. He had to find a way to save his son. He had to find a way to get through to him. He had to find a way to remind him of who he was. He found the photo album at the bottom of a box, a forgotten treasure. He opened it, and he was transported back in time. The first page was a picture of him and Odessa on their wedding day. She was a vision in a simple white dress, her face a radiant smile, her eyes sparkling with love and a kind of fierce hope. He was a young man with a full head of dark hair, his face a little more hopeful, a little less worn. He turned the page and there was a picture of them standing in front of the factory, a small, proud smile on their faces. The factory looked so much smaller than a little red brick building with a single smokestack. He turned the page again, and there was a picture of Jareth as a little boy, his face smudged with dirt, his small hands holding a toy truck. He was a happy boy, a boy who was loved, a boy who was adored. He turned the page again, and he saw a picture of Odessa, her face a little more tired now, her eyes filled with a quiet sadness. She was standing in the middle of a field of wild grass that grew behind their home, a field that was now a part of the factory. He remembered that day. He remembered her talking about her family, a family that had owned the land for generations, a family that had made a promise to keep the land in the family, a promise that he had sworn to keep. He ran a finger over the picture of her face, his heart aching with a profound, aching grief. He missed her so much. She would have known what to do. She would have known how to fix this. She would have known how to save their son. He turned the page again, and he saw a picture of a younger Jareth, his face a mask of disappointment. He was standing in front of the factory, a wrench in his hand, a look of frustration on his face. Lyle remembered that day. Jareth had been trying to fix a machine, and he had failed. Lyle had been a little too impatient, a little too harsh. He had wanted his son to be a man of his hands, a man of the earth, a man who could build something from nothing. He had wanted him to be like him. He had wanted him to take over the factory, to carry on his legacy. He had wanted him to be a man he could be proud of. And Jareth had failed. He had been too impatient. He had been too harsh. He had been too much of a father and not enough of a friend. He felt a sudden, crushing guilt. He had pushed his son away. He had pushed him to a life he didn't want. He had pushed him to a life he didn't love. He had pushed him to a life he didn't want, and now he was paying the price. The factory, the home, the legacy. It was all a part of a larger, more complicated story. A story of a father who had pushed his son away. He reached for the last page of the album, his fingers trembling. There was no picture there, just a small, folded piece of paper. He unfolded it, his hands shaking, and saw his wife's handwriting. The words were a little faded, but they were still clear. "Lyle," it said, "this is for you. A reminder of our promise. Our promise to keep the land in the family. Our promise to protect it. Our promise to never sell it. Not for $1 million. Not for 100 million. Not for all the money in the world. It's a legacy. A legacy of love. A legacy of family. A legacy of us." The words were a revelation. He hadn't just been planning to sell the factory for Jareth's benefit. He had been planning to betray his wife's memory. He had been planning to break a promise he had made to the woman he loved. The factory wasn't just a building. It was a family secret. A secret he had kept for years. A secret he had been ready to betray. He looked at the words and he felt a cold dread settle in his bones. The land. It was the land. The land was the key. Jareth knew about the land. Jareth knew about the promise. Jareth was not just trying to take his factory. He was trying to take a part of his family. He was trying to take a part of his wife's legacy. He felt a profound sense of sadness. His son wasn't just greedy. He was a betrayer. The marble floors of the mansion were cold beneath Lyle's worn shoes. He had driven the old pickup truck to Jareth's house, a quiet, tense drive that felt like a lifetime. He had to talk to his son. He had to get the truth. He had to know why. He had to know why his son was trying to take everything from him. The butler, a young man in a white jacket, had opened the door with a practiced, neutral expression. "Jareth is in the study," he said, his voice a low, flat murmur. "He's expecting you." The words were a surprise. Jareth was expecting him. He had known he was coming. Lyle walked through the cavernous foyer, his footsteps echoing in the silence, and found the study at the end of a long hallway. The room was dark, the curtains drawn, the only light coming from a single lamp on a mahogany desk. Jareth was sitting in a plush leather chair, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, his face a mask of exhaustion. He looked up as Lyle entered, his eyes hollow and red. "Dad," he said, his voice a low, weary rumble. "I knew you'd come." Lyle didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at his son, his heart a heavy stone in his chest. "Why, Jareth," he said, his voice a low whisper. "Why are you doing this?" Jareth sighed, a long, weary sound, and took a long sip of his drink. He put the glass down on the desk with a quiet clink. Dad, you just don't understand, he said. You never understood. You always thought I wasn't good enough. You always thought I couldn't do it. You always thought I was a disappointment. The words were a shock. They were a knife to the heart. Lyle felt a sudden, profound sadness. He had never thought that. He had loved his son. He had loved him more than anything in the world. He had wanted him to be a man of his hands, a man of the earth, a man who could build something from nothing. He had wanted him to be like him. He had wanted him to be a man he could be proud of. He had never thought he was a disappointment. He had never thought he wasn't good enough. He had only ever thought that he was the most important thing in the world. Jareth, he said, his voice a low, desperate plea. I never thought that. I love you. I've always been proud of you. I just wanted you to be happy. Jareth laughed, a short, bitter sound. Happy, he said. Dad, you never let me be happy. You always pushed me to be something I wasn't. You always pushed me to be you. He stood up, his face a mask of anger and frustration. He walked to the window, pulling back a curtain, a shaft of light cutting through the darkness. This house, he said, his voice a low growl. This car. This money. This is me, Dad. This is who I am. This is who I was meant to be. This is a life I built for myself. A life you never wanted for me. Lyle felt the truth of his words. He had been so focused on his own dream for his son, on his own legacy, that he had never thought about what Jareth wanted. He had never thought about what Jareth's dreams were. He had only ever thought about his own. He felt a crushing weight of guilt settle on his shoulders. He had pushed his son away. He had pushed him to a life he didn't want. He had pushed him to a life he didn't love. And now he was paying the price. Lyle took a step toward his son, his hand reaching out. Jareth, he said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I ever made you feel that way. I just wanted you to have everything. Jareth turned, his eyes filled with a raw, desperate pain. I had everything, Dad, he said, his voice a low whisper. I had everything until I met Oswin. The name was a hammer blow. The warehouse was a dark, cavernous space, its windows covered with grime, the only light coming from a few bare bulbs hanging from the ceiling. The air was thick with the scent of damp concrete and something acrid and metallic. Lyle felt a cold dread settle in his bones as he walked through the door. This was Oswin's place. This was where he held court. This was where he did business. This was where he ruined lives. Lyle's heart was pounding a frantic rhythm in his chest. He was here for a reason. He was here to make a deal. He was here to save his son. He saw Oswin at the far end of the warehouse, sitting at a table with two of his men, their faces a mask of cold, professional indifference. Oswin was a man with a hard face and eyes like chips of ice. He was a man who looked like he had never smiled a day in his life. He looked at Lyle and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. Lyle, he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. I was wondering when you'd show up. Your son, he's been a little troublesome. Lyle's jaw was tight. He's my son, he said, his voice a low growl. He's my family, and you're not going to hurt him. Oswin laughed, a short, bitter sound. Hurt him? He said. Lyle, your son is a grown man. He made a deal. He owes me, and I always get paid, one way or another. Lyle took a step forward, his hands clenched into fists. I know, he said. I know he does. But he doesn't have the money. He doesn't have what you want. Oswin's smile widened. Oh, he has what I want, he said. He has the factory. He has the land. He has your legacy. Lyle felt a profound sense of sadness. Oswin knew. He knew everything. He had been using his son as a puppet, a pawn in a game he didn't understand. He looked at Oswin, his eyes filled with a new resolve. I'm here to make a deal, he said. I'm here to pay his debt. Oswin's face was a mask of amusement. You, he said. Lyle, you have nothing. Your son has all the money, all the power, all the luck. Lyle shook his head. I have the factory, he said. I have the land. I have the legacy, and I'm willing to give it to you. All of it. For Jareth's freedom. Oswin's smile faltered for a moment, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He looked at his two men and a silent conversation passed between them. They were assessing him. They were assessing the situation. They were assessing his worth. Oswin turned back to Lyle, his face a hard mask. You're a fool, old man, he said. You're willing to give up everything for a boy who threw you out like a piece of trash. Lyle's eyes hardened. He's my son, he said. He's my family, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect him. Oswin laughed again, a sound that was hollow and empty. You have a deal, old man, he said. The factory, the land, the legacy, all of it. For your son's freedom. He stood up and a sudden, sharp pain shot through Lyle's chest. The deal was done. He had given up everything. He had given up his life. He had given up his legacy. He had given up his home. He had given up his memories. He had given up his wife's promise. But he had saved his son. He had saved his family. He had saved a life. Lyle took a step toward Oswin, his hand outstretched. "I'll get the papers," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "I'll get the papers tomorrow morning. I'll give you everything. Just leave my son alone." Oswin's smile was a thin, cruel line. "Lyle," he said, "there's just one more thing. I want the deed to the factory. The one that's in your name. I want it tomorrow, and I want it now. If I don't have it by the end of the day, I'll send my boys to your home, and they'll find you, and they'll take what I want. They'll take everything you have, and they'll make sure you never get to see your son again. Do we understand each other?" The words were a terrifying threat. Lyle's heart pounded a frantic rhythm in his chest. He was trapped. He was in a cage. He had no way out. He had to find the deed. He had to find a way to give it to him. He had to find a way to save his son. He had to find a way to make it right. He had to find a way to end this. The night air was cold, a biting wind that cut through Lyle's thin jacket. He was standing on the steps of the factory, his heart a heavy stone in his chest. The deed was in his pocket, a folded piece of paper that felt like a burning weight. He had to give it to Oswin. He had to give it to the man who was threatening his son's life. He had to give it to the man who was using his son as a weapon against him. But he couldn't. He couldn't betray his wife's memory. He couldn't betray the promise he had made. He couldn't give up the last piece of his legacy. He had to find another way. He had to find a way to get out of this mess. He had to find a way to save his son. He pulled out his phone, his hands trembling, and looked up Boone's number. Boone was his friend. Boone was his brother. Boone would know what to do. Boone would help him. He pressed the call button, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm in his chest. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a click. "Lyle." Boone's voice was a low, tired murmur. "I've been expecting your call." The words were a surprise, a shock. Lyle felt a sudden cold dread settle in his bones. "Boone," he said, his voice a low whisper. "What do you mean?" Boone sighed, a long, weary sound. "Lyle," he said, "I can't help you. I'm sorry. I can't do it." The words were a betrayal, a final crushing blow. Lyle felt a profound sense of sadness. His last hope was gone. His last friend was gone. He was truly alone in the world. He felt a tear roll down his cheek, a single hot tear that felt like a burning ember. "Boone," he said, his voice a desperate plea. "Why? I need your help. My son. He's in trouble. He's in a lot of trouble. I have to save him." Boone was silent for a long moment. "Lyle," he said, his voice a low, pained whisper. "I know he is. I know he is. But I can't help you. I'm sorry. I just can't." The words were a knife to the heart, a final crushing blow. Lyle felt a profound sense of despair. He had lost everything. He had lost his son. He had lost his home. He had lost his legacy. And now he had lost his friend. He had no one left. He was completely, utterly alone in the world. "Boone," he said, his voice a low, desperate plea. "Please, tell me what's going on. Tell me what I'm missing." Boone sighed again, a long, weary sound. "Lyle," he said, "Jareth came to me. He came to me a week ago. He came to me with a briefcase full of cash. He said he wanted me to keep quiet. He said he wanted me to keep quiet about the offer. He said he wanted me to keep quiet about the company. He said he wanted me to keep quiet about everything. He said he would pay me a lot of money to keep quiet." The words were a revelation. Lyle felt a sudden, searing pain. His son had betrayed him. His friend had betrayed him. He had been so wrong about everything. He had been so wrong about the people he loved. He had been so wrong about the people he trusted. He had been so wrong about his own life. He felt a profound sense of shame. Shame that he had been so foolish. Shame that he had been so naive. Shame that he had been so blind. Shame that he had been so trusting. "Boone," he said, his voice a low, pained whisper. "Why?" Boone's voice was a whisper. "Lyle, I'm sorry. I needed the money. I needed the money for my family. But Jareth, he's in a lot of trouble. He's in a lot of trouble you don't even know. He's been in contact with Oswin for months. He's been in contact with him since before he even won the lottery. He was in deep debt. He was in a lot of debt. And he was desperate. He was desperate to get out. He was desperate to find a way to make it right. He was desperate to find a way to get out of the mess he was in. He told me he was going to take the factory. He told me he was going to take everything. He told me he was going to give it all to Oswin. He told me he was going to use it to pay his debt. He told me he was going to use it to save himself. He told me he was going to use it to save his wife. He told me he was going to use it to save his future. The words were a terrifying revelation, a cold, hard truth. Lyle felt a profound sense of sadness. His son wasn't just a betrayer. He was a desperate man who had been pushed to the edge, a desperate man who had been pushed to the brink, a desperate man who had been pushed to a place he could never come back from. The phone call with Boone had left Lyle feeling empty, hollowed out. The air in his home, usually a comfort, now felt heavy and suffocating. He had spent the night staring at the ceiling, the old, familiar cracks, a map of a life that was now over. The deed to the factory was on the nightstand, a small, folded piece of paper that held the weight of his entire life. He had to give it up. He had to give it to Oswin. He had to save his son. It was the only way. It was the only choice he had left. The thought of it, the cold, final reality of it, was a physical pain in his chest. He was going to betray his wife's memory. He was going to break the promise he had made. He was going to give up the last piece of his legacy. He felt a profound sense of failure. He had failed his wife. He had failed his son. He had failed himself. He had to go to the courthouse. He had to make it right. He had to find a way to end this. He walked into Maribel's office. The morning light a bright, harsh glare on the floor. She was sitting at her desk, her face a mask of worry. She looked up as he entered, her eyes filled with a deep, profound concern. "Lyle," she said, her voice a low murmur, "I heard about the phone call with Boone. I'm so sorry." Lyle just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He sat down in the plush leather chair, a new emptiness in his heart. "I'm here to sign the papers," he said, his voice a low, flat murmur. "I'm here to give up the factory. I'm here to make it right. I'm here to save my son." Maribel shook her head, a single firm motion. "Lyle," she said, "you can't do that. You can't give up the factory. It's a bad deal. It's a bad idea. It's a bad choice." Lyle looked at her, his eyes filled with a new resolve. "I have to," he said. "I have to save him. He's my son. He's my family." Maribel sighed, a long, weary sound. "Lyle," she said, "there's something you need to know." He looked at her, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm in his chest. "What?" he asked, his voice a low whisper. "What do I need to know?" She reached into her desk and pulled out a small, worn folder. The folder was old, its paper yellowed and brittle with age. She opened it, and a single piece of paper was inside. It was a legal document, its words a dense, complicated mess of legal jargon. She placed it on the desk and pushed it toward him. "Lyle," she said, her voice a low, steady rumble, "this is a legal document. A legal document that your wife Odessa signed a long time ago. She signed it with me. It's a legal document that gives me the power to intervene. To intervene if the factory or the land was ever in danger. To intervene if it was ever used for a purpose other than what it was meant for. To intervene if it was ever used for a purpose that was not what she wanted." The words were a revelation, a stunning, breathtaking truth. Lyle felt a sudden, powerful wave of emotion. His wife had known. She had known that something like this could happen. She had known that one day he might be faced with a choice between his son and his legacy, and she had given him a way out. He stared at the paper, his mind racing. He had to do something. He had to use it. He had to find a way to make it right. He had to find a way to save his son. He looked at Maribel, his eyes filled with a new hope. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "What do I do with this?" Maribel's eyes were filled with a new resolve. "Lyle," she said, "we're going to go to the courthouse. We're going to go to the courthouse and we're going to file this document. We're going to file this document and we're going to fight back. We're going to fight for the factory. We're going to fight for the legacy. We're going to fight for your son's future. We're going to fight for everything you have ever loved. We're going to fight for everything you have ever lost. We're going to fight for everything you have ever believed in. We're going to fight for everything you have ever dreamed of. We're going to fight for your son's life." The words were a battle cry, a call to arms, a final desperate stand against the forces of greed and betrayal. He felt a sudden, powerful surge of emotion. He was not alone. He was not alone in this fight. He had a friend. He had a lawyer. He had a wife. He had a legacy. He had a future. He had a son. The courtroom was the same fluorescent lights, The same polished wood, the same cold, dispassionate silence. Lyle was sitting at a table with Maribel, her face a mask of quiet confidence. Across the room, Jareth was sitting at a table with his lawyer, Kala, her face a mask of cold, professional indifference. The judge, a woman with a tired, kind face, was looking at them, her eyes filled with a deep, profound sadness. She had heard the arguments, she had heard the lawyers, she had heard the lies. She was ready to make a decision. Lyle felt a sudden, powerful wave of emotion. He had to do something. He had to do something to make it right. He had to do something to save his son. He had to do something to save his legacy. He had to do something to save his life. He stood up, his legs trembling, and walked to the front of the room. He looked at the judge, his eyes filled with a new resolve, a new purpose. He wasn't just a father anymore. He was a protector. He was a warrior. He was a man who would fight for his son. He would fight for his family. He would fight for everything he had ever loved. He would fight for everything he had ever lost. He would fight for everything he had ever believed in. He would fight for everything he had ever dreamed of. He would fight for his son's life. "Your Honor," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "I'm here to make a statement." The judge looked at him, her eyes filled with a new interest. "Mr. Lyle," she said, "you may proceed." He took a deep breath, and he started to speak. He told her about the lottery win. He told her about the new house. He told her about the eviction notice. He told her about the shell company. He told her about the claim on the factory. He told her about Oswin. He told her about the debt. He told her about the threats. He told her about the sacrifice. He told her about the promise he had made to his wife. He told her about the secret he had kept for so long. He told her about the legacy. He told her about the love. He told her about the betrayal. He told her everything, a torrent of words pouring out of him, a dam that had finally broken. He held nothing back. He wanted her to know the full story. He wanted her to know the full extent of the betrayal. He wanted her to know the full extent of his love for his son. He wanted her to know everything. He walked to the judge's bench and placed the deed on the polished wood. "This is the factory," he said, his voice a low whisper. "This is the factory I have worked my entire life for. This is the factory my wife and I built together. This is the factory that holds a lifetime of memories. This is the factory that is the last piece of my legacy. This is the factory that my son has been trying to take from me." He looked at Jareth, his eyes filled with a deep, profound love. Jareth's face was a mask of shock. He was staring at the deed, his eyes wide with a new understanding. The lawyer, Kala, was shaking her head, a look of disbelief on her face. "Your Honor," Lyle said, his voice a low, steady rumble, "I'm here to make a statement. I'm not here to fight my son. I'm here to save him. I'm here to give up the factory. I'm here to give up my legacy. I'm here to give up my life. I'm here to give it all to Oswin, to pay Jareth's debt, to save him from the man who is threatening his life." The words were a final desperate act of love, a final desperate act of sacrifice, a final desperate act of a father who would do anything to save his son. The courtroom was silent. The only sound was the low, steady hum of the fluorescent lights. The judge looked at him, her eyes filled with a deep, profound sadness. She looked at Jareth, and she saw the tears streaming down his face. He was finally seeing it. He was finally understanding it. He was finally seeing his father for who he was, a man who loved him, a man who would do anything to save him, a man who was willing to give up everything for him. He was a boy who had been pushed to the brink, a boy who had been pushed to a place he could never come back from. And now he was finally coming back. The judge looked at Lyle, her face a mask of quiet confidence. "Mr. Dad," Jareth's voice was a low, desperate whisper. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. I'm so sorry I ever made you feel that way. I'm so sorry I ever pushed you away. I'm so sorry I ever hurt you." Lyle just shook his head, a single definitive motion. He wrapped his arms around his son, a tight, desperate embrace. He felt his son's arms wrap around him, a tight, desperate embrace. He felt his son's tears on his shoulder, a warm, wet burn. He felt his son's love. "Jareth," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble, "I love you. I've always loved you. I've always been proud of you. I've always wanted you to be happy." Jareth's voice was a whisper. "Dad," he said, "I love you. I've always loved you. I've always been proud of you. I've always wanted you to be happy." He looked at his son, and he saw the boy he had once been, the boy who had played on the factory floor, the boy who had clung to his leg, the boy who had looked at him with awe. He saw the man he was now, a man who had lost everything, a man who was starting over, a man who was finally free. Jareth pulled a small, carved wooden piece from his pocket, a small piece of wood that was a part of a larger, more complicated story. A story of a father who had pushed his son away. A story of a son who had pushed his father away. A story of a love that had been lost and found again. He handed it to Lyle, his hand trembling. "It's a piece of the old lathe," he said, his voice a whisper. "The one we fixed together. The one you loved. The one we built together. It's a reminder of who we are. It's a reminder of where we came from. It's a reminder of us. It's a reminder of our legacy." Lyle took the wooden piece, his fingers tracing the smooth, worn surface. He looked at his son, and he smiled. A true, honest, simple smile. The factory was gone. The money was gone. The legacy was gone. But they had each other, and that was all that mattered. The man and his son walked away from the factory, and they never looked back.